Yes.
And I'm curious about that rule.
Yeah.
And how about what similar means?
Yeah, so seriously, don't use the same text in your proposals, because they are now searching, doing text searching. If you plagiarize yourself, you get in trouble with the Inspector General. You don't want the Inspector General coming to your institution and saying that you plagiarized yourself. That's really not something you want for your career. So do not submit the same proposal at the same time to two different programs. That's a big no-no. NIH, you can actually do that. They don't care. It's an NSF thing. I had this big, I'm doing a thing with some NIH program officers. We had this long discussion about it. They're like, that's not a problem. And I'm like, oh, it's a problem. So don't ever do that at NSF. Clearly there's extent to which you do that. I mean, if you plagiarize one sentence, I don't think anybody's going to do anything. But the big thing is when you're double dipping in two programs.
What about repeat submissions?
So repeat submissions. If you had something rejected from a program, it comes back to you. At that point, you can submit it anywhere else, right? And you can submit it to a different program. If you don't change it at all, first of all, you're not likely to be successful in the other program. So I've gotten those. I get these programs that were things that were submitted to EHR and then that got rejected there, and it comes to my program, and it's not written for my program, and my reviewers go, well, they clearly just took their twos proposal and submitted it here, and it doesn't get funded, right? So it's just a waste of time to do that. I mean, you think, well, it's easy enough for me to just resubmit it, but don't do that. It's a waste of the reviewer's time, and they become resentful, so don't do that. There's also something called return without review that program officers can do. And we can do that if somebody submits the thing to my program again and hasn't changed it at all. And there's a judgment call that program officers can make. And so depending on how full the panel is, depending on whether they like to return without review or not, they could say, well, you didn't substantively change this. You did some window dressing, but this is really the same proposal you submitted last round, and just return it without review. But you're not going to get in trouble for plagiarizing in that case. That's just, we're not going to spend the government's time on that.
Okay.
Hi. So this is mainly for Donna, but certainly not only the panel, but also everyone else. So Donna, there's this great advice in RED to think about working through the professional societies to help promulgate, and especially relating to the diversity issues that, of course, are really central. I've tried with one of these alphabet soups, and of course, we all know that their central staff are the central staff, and they represent the whole of the profession. And so I am just looking for models for how to formalize that, because I've had amazing discussions, but when it comes to meaningfully putting their organization as a collaborator on something like exactly this, there's a culture difference in terms of, as you say, when you approach minority serving or a women's college, then it's very clear what the parameters are. But how to approach the executive staff of one of these groups and say, I would like to do something substantive has been very unusual. Mm-hmm. So you, but also please just anyone, are there good models of how to build that?
I mean, I think, one of the issues is that the professional societies are also competing for funds. So ASEE brings proposals regularly to my program and gets funded to also do research and engineering education. So I think that's one of the things. So in that sense, it's not that different from the minority serving institution issue where that's sort of part of it. They are stretched really thin. So part of why they come to us is that they are always scrambling to raise money. They're a nonprofit organization, and they do what other nonprofits do, which is focus on fundraising a lot. And so they may not have the bandwidth. So for ASEE, which I know pretty well, I think you're better off trying to do stuff not with the staff, but with the membership. And so you don't end up putting them on institutionally. But if you were doing a K-12 proposal, rather than working with the staff at ASEE, who I don't know, I mean, there might be a K-12 expert on their staff, I'm not sure that there is, but you would want to work with the K-12 division of ASEE to do stuff. And that's, in terms of getting your impact out, that's probably more effective anyway, if you work through the membership. So So that's one thing I would suggest, is think about membership, not just staff. The staff are really pressed. But where there's some synergy, then by all means, right, you should try to collaborate. But you have to sort of, as with other collaborators, you have to sort of get inside their head. What are they trying to achieve? What are their objectives? How do you collaborate with them to do that? Because I bet they get lots of, if everybody who had their research area came to ASEE and said, help me with my work on this, they wouldn't be able to do it, so.
Yeah, that would be my advice too, that this may not be an example that's exactly what you're describing, but I know, understand what their needs are and how can you help them. So an example in Indiana is there's an industry trade organization that was recently formed around orthopedic equipment, and their concern is they want to keep the industry in the state of Indiana, that they don't want to see it move overseas. And so I think, if that's their central issue, really understand what their central issue is, figure out, how you can contribute to it, so that if there are, multiple people that are competing for your attention and they have to make a judgment call of who are they going to work with, it's, why are you the right partner?
Thanks.
There's someone behind you. Yep.
So I just wanted to clarify something. So NIH, you're not allowed to dual submit.
Oh, you're not?
No, you're
Huh,
not.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I'm on a study section. Your proposal will get bounced. Even if you try to dual submit an R21 and an R01, and they're on the same topic, your proposal will get bounced. And the Eng at NSF, the Eng director, and the bio director at NSF are beginning to look at coming up with a way to directly compare NIH proposals and bio and Eng proposals, where those proposals are, where the calls are on similar topics, to then be able to compare dual submissions. So NIH, you don't have to directly report if you have pending proposals at the same time, whereas NSF you do.
I'm glad to hear that about NIH, because
Yes.
I was like pretty incredulous that they
No,
dropped that.
they bounce. And a lot of times people will dual submit to NIH because you don't have to report if you have something pending. And then they try to game the system that way. But then it's fortunate because you have people on study sections who are also on NSF panels, and then you can tell when people are doing that. But yeah, you cannot, don't do that. It will get bounced.
Yeah, so do not dual submit. That's always good policy.
Hi, Donna, you mentioned how important it is to have clear research questions, right? Pick the right educational, theoretical framework and using the right methodology. But we've been trained as researchers in a technical field, right? Not as educators. So, and this is also a question for those of you in the audience, right? Those of you who've successfully obtained research in engineering education, how did you approach this for the first time? Because this has been my main, concern.
Yeah, so I'll give a quick answer and then let these two talk, which is that RIGI is designed exactly to help you do that, because you get with your co-PI who's done this before, and they help you develop your research questions. Okay. So RIGI is a great place to start for that exact reason. It was designed to address that exact issue.
Okay.
But, go ahead.
And I can address it from my personal perspective. So I'm in sustainable engineering, and one of the things that we just got asked all the time was, how should this be designed? Can you come into my class once a week, and because you have so much time, and teach my class for me? I was actually really interested to say, if you want to incorporate sustainability into your curriculum, this is what it should look like. And so we did have kind of control universities and control curriculums, and curriculums that were, had a lot of sustainability education intertwined. So that's how we approached it, because we really wanted to answer the question. So we approached it the same way as we would our own, technical research challenges.
I think I'd be interested in Donna's comments on this response, but I think it's important to look at the programs and understand what are the objectives that you really want to do, and is your interest more in making sort of an institutional change, or is your interest more in studying engineering education? And in my case, it was really, I'm more interested in an institutional change, and I don't consider myself an engineering education researcher, so I've cultivated relationships with people that's their primary interest. So I think, understanding your limitations and your interests and which program you submit to, but if you're interested in institutional change and you try to cast it for, an engineering education program and you don't have fundamental questions of interest to that community, you're not going to be successful.
Right, I mean, you can ask research questions about institutional change, so there's sort of a middle ground in there. And RED is this interesting hybrid because it's both implementation and research. So this is where you have a chair who we don't expect to be an engineering education researcher, but we have someone on the team who we hope will shape questions about what is this grand experiment we're doing in our department, what does it mean? And they will have specific research questions about how change is happening and what kinds of change are effective. And there will be a social scientist looking at department dynamics and social dynamics in change processes. So that'll be a whole other set of research questions. But the other place to go is the award search will give you when you look at people's project summaries, they should have research questions in the project summary. So you can pretty quickly read a bunch of example research questions. And then of course there's the literature, but that takes time to get on top of. And that's also why RIGI sort of is meant to give you 2 years to kind of have a mentor, explore stuff, find the right literature to read, and all of that.
Right, I would just add from my own experience that collaborating with a social scientist is great. I mean, you can find the literature on your own, but there's a learning curve, and then also I just generally find that with my engineering training, I have a different way of looking at that literature and reading and interpreting that literature than my social scientist colleagues do. And so, I mean, I got into this before RIGI, but I always collaborated first with a sociologist and now with a learning scientist, and it's super helpful. Yeah.
This is a question, I guess, mostly for Donna. So the PFE track, it seems to me that there could be a lot of really interesting questions there about the formation of engineers and how they're shaped that maybe aren't on a departmental level. But right now it's only the red
Correct.
track, right? So are there other opportunities that aren't departmental, but that would maybe fall under that theme that you would suggest?
So the genius of my division director writing into the red solicitation that PFE is a multi-year initiative implies that there will be other opportunities for PFE, although those have not yet been released. So, but you might imagine that RIGI, right? RIGI has to come out. RIGI could be branded under a PFE framework, right? So that'll open up a broader set of questions. I mean, the same questions you would have asked under RIGI would likely still fit under PFE, but there's other types of questions that you could now ask with the sort of broadening of thinking about how people become engineers and thinking about profession, what it means for the field to be a profession and all of that. So.
Hi, I'm Shannon Siston from UC Berkeley. I'm a lecturer there, and I think there are actually a lot of us in the room that are in teaching professor type roles and have an interest in engineering education research. And I've been fortunate to be part of a collaborative team with someone who is in a tenure track, and we did secure some NSF funding. But I guess I'm trying to challenge my own hypothesis that I wouldn't be awarded a proposal as a PI. So I just kind of wanted to test that out on you. What do you think are effective strategies for people who are not on the tenure track to participate meaningfully? And would a review panel take a proposal seriously if we demonstrated that we had institutional support to do the work?
I mean, yes, absolutely. And we do fund a lot of people who are often the research faculty, who are full-time soft money people. So, and there are lots of very successful, there's this 2-month rule that you may or may not know about when you write a budget. The most amount of money you can have from NSF ever is 2 months' salary, except for if you are somebody who doesn't have other responsibilities at your institution where they expect you to raise all your money, then you can actually have more than 2 months' salary if you can justify that. So there are a lot of people that aren't tenure track faculty getting NSF money all the time. It's less common for lecturers because I think of the time constraints for lecturers. If you're teaching 5 classes or more, which is often the case, then having the time to do that and having the institutional backing is difficult. But once a proposal comes to us from the institution, we're interested in is the person qualified? And we're interested in, are the resources available? And is it a good project? And so it really shouldn't come in. The only time that it comes in is when we're looking for a permanence of the person, right? So with career, for example, the reason why that's for tenure track faculty is because we want to see that institution commit to developing that person. And so someone who's not on a long-term contract isn't eligible. But there are people who apply for career who aren't technically tenure track, but for whom they have, it's or equivalent, right? So there are institutions that will set up equivalencies to make it possible for people to apply to career. So, so that's sort of, I think NSF's very willing to fund, we want to fund good research. So the status doesn't matter to us.
Thanks.
Right?
And I would just add that there's an FOEE attendee from last year that successfully followed the sort of trajectory that Melissa outlined, got internal funding, and then got a RIGI, and I'm pretty sure she's teaching track faculty at your institution, right?
Oh, yeah, Cheryl.
Right. So, so there's a nice trajectory there that started here and that you can follow as well.
And I see a lot of bio sketches with FOEE in it, just so you know. And that's a good thing.
I guess mine is a multi-part question. I'm pretty much a newbie to educational research. My question is, how much preliminary work/data do you need to have into the grant? And second part of the question is there a tipping point to when there's too much?
So, yes, I mean, I don't know if you all want to weigh in on this. Having pilot data is often helpful because you're demonstrating that you can do what you're proposing to do and that you have a reasonable, reason to believe that it works, right? So that's the reason to have pilot data. If you have prior funded work, there are specific rules in the grant proposal guide about that. And by the way, they just changed this year. So, and it's actually really persnickety, so don't get caught up in this, but if you have prior work and you're applying, you must say specifically, I think it's is it broader impacts and intellectual merit? Yeah, so you have to divide it, and it actually it implies in the GPG you have to have specific sections on each. And we recently had a competition where there was a question about, do you literally have to say that with the headers or not? And some program officers are going to say you do. So better to just put the headers in, because it would be terrible for something to be returned without review over that. That's really persnickety.
And the dollar amounts.
Yeah, the dollar amounts have to be there. The GPG spells it out. So, so if next time you write a proposal, make sure you check the GPG about that, because that's crazy. But it's in there. So, so anyway, but that's sort of irrelevant. But I think, but important to know. I think, yes, if you spend too much time talking about what you did and not enough time talking about what you're going to do, then you've sort of upset that balance, right? So that's the judgment call. There's no formula for it, but you really don't want to make yourself vulnerable to that kind of review where someone says, well, they just spent too much time talking about what they already did. I don't understand what they're doing now.
Yeah, I know as a panelist, that's been something that I've been, sensitive to is the experience level that the proposer has, relative to what it is that they're proposing to do and the resources that they're asking for. That for somebody who's new to the field, and obviously there are going to be a lot of people that are new, I think if somebody has no track record, and is not that established in their institution as sort of their bio sketch may indicate, that's asking for a lot of resources to do something that's hugely transformative that feels kind of out of whack. So I think, just kind of almost trying to put yourself in a reviewer's shoes, independent of, what the solicitation says, and, would a reasonable person think this is a reasonable balance is probably one way to look at it.
Thank you.
You could also use the community that you're developing here to get some informal feedback on your proposal if you prepare it in sufficient time before the deadline. So I think communities like this that offer critical feedback in advance can really improve the quality of education proposals.
Donna, you were pretty clear about dissemination and how important that is. I'm curious on these exploration grants where you don't have a lot of data, so it might not seem like you should go out with it. If you could comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to be creative about those kinds of projects, because it's true. I mean, the expectation will be different from the panel. I mean, they know that it's an exploratory grant. What you can do, what I asked for our EE to do, is to have a roadmap for transformation, right? So you might say, well, we don't know what results we're going to get, and you don't want to be presumptive, because a panel will ding you for that. If you're like, well, we're going to find this, and then we're going to do that, they'll be like, you don't know you're going to find that. So don't be presumptive like that. But if you say, in this project we're going to be testing this out, and what we see eventually happening, while you don't have resources in that project to do it, you could say, I can imagine if this is successful, we could build these relationships to do this, transformational work later. And there might be things that you can do that lay the groundwork for that later. And so put into your, in your early project, the steps you will take to sort of set that up as you're doing that. So building relationships is critical. And I think, it's hard to know without specifics of sort of what you could actually do, but I think you want to think longer term. When you have an exploratory project, just think about the next project as you're writing the proposal, and that will help you kind of think about how your transformation is going to happen in the long run, and then you can sort of back out what you need to do at the early stages to set that up.
Actually, before the next question, can I just see a show of hands of people who have reviewed for NSF education proposals? Okay, so look around at your peers, and these are the people that you should be actually contacting next time you want to submit for some friendly reviews. Okay.
Actually, I had my first question about that, and the first one's actually short, and as you mentioned that you have fewer spots for panelists than requests. Do you have an idea of what that ratio is?
I would say I think I've gotten to most of the people over time that I've had requests from. But there's sort of there's different things. So I have a huge list of people, right? And so there's about a 3-to-1 yield, and this has been very consistent. It's very odd. So I invite 3 times the people that I need for the panel. And then I get the right number of people every time. It's amazing. It works out exactly. It's so weird. So a lot of people can get invited, but then they can't come. So to actually get the people to my panel is another story. But there's a lot of folks, there's almost like a retirement job that some people fancy themselves doing. So there's a few people that are retired folks that volunteer for every panel. They're like frequent flyers. And they have a lot of review experience, and so sometimes they're good to have around. But they also kind of want you to invite them to every single one. So like I get the same request from the same person over and over and over again a lot of times. But so it's sort of odd. But with new people, I try not to put too many new people in one panel because that can be bad. So I try to put in a couple. But I have, now that there's red, I'm going to have a lot of panels. But I have, for our EE, I'll have 2 panels each deadline. So that's 20 people each time, right? And so a couple of those will be new people each time. But the number of requests fluctuates, so it's hard to say. But EHR is different. They have, they'll get 1,200 dues proposals, and they'll have, I don't know how many panels they have, but a lot. So it's a lot easier to become a panelist for EHR.
Okay, and my second question is related to the type of, you said about being edgy or something in your research, and my question is, I'm kind of new to the research and engineering education specifically, and even when I came here, there are a lot of people that use clickers, for example, so there's a lot of overlap in the type of educational engagement. So let's say we take a topic, student engagement. Well, student engagement in itself is not a new topic. There's active learning, there have been various types of ways that people have gone about doing that. So even though there's a lot of literature supporting it, how edgy is too edgy, where they say, oh, that's too edgy. You're so edgy now that you're off the cliff. You fell off the cliff. Too edgy. We're not going to fund that because that won't work. I mean, is there that kind of assessment in the panel? It won't work, so we can't try it? Or is it
It's
that
not
might work,
usually-
so give it a shot.
Yeah, it's not usually that won't work, but sometimes they'll want pilot data. So when you have something that's more high risk, that's when it helps a lot to have some pilot data to say, I have a reasonable suspicion that this is going to work, and it's based on these results that I've had before. So that's where, if you have something that's really out of the blue, where they haven't heard of it before, then you do have to sort of take the time to explain it, to make it accessible. Sometimes this happens with dense theory stuff too, and people are bringing in a new theory sometimes from cognitive science or whatever. If they don't explain it well, the panel will go, I don't even understand what they're trying to do. So there's the confusion part, which is important when you do something new and high risk. And then there's the kind of convincing people that it's likely to work piece, which is, if you have pilot data, that's the best way. If you don't, you can sometimes have the internal funding's probably the best way to go if you can get it, right? Because then you can get your pilot data and present that.
And then if I could comment too, having the assessment plan, if it is something that's a little more radical, is really important, because then you're going to need to be able to prove it later.
Yeah, and I think that's a place too where if, we're engaging a social scientist or others that, if you're new to the field and, aren't as well versed in what kind of assessment methodologies, I think the edgier you get, the more important it is to have people that understand that world.
Right. And assessment is not always research, so this is another thing. So when you're writing a research grant, assessment is part of what you're doing, and it stands separate from your research question and how you answer it. So that's an important thing to know, because sometimes people come to me with a proposal that's like, I do this really cool thing in my class, and I'm going to assess it. Ta-da, that's my research question. And that isn't sufficient. So as much as I'd like to fund, I think that stuff's really cool, but we just don't have the money, so can't fund everything.
Okay, let's make this our last question. Yep, go ahead.
I was just going to follow up on that question. So what if you're at a university that is very traditional, they haven't done anything really edgy or innovative, but other universities have, and you would like to start implementing some of that? Would the NSF be a good place to go for funding, because it wouldn't necessarily be compellingly new research, but it may be for a new demographic?
So yeah, that's tricky to navigate. So there's a few ways you could navigate that. One way is through a collaborative proposal with someone who is more edgy, because they would love to be able to say about the transformative power of their research is that they're partnering with your institution to do this cool thing. So you can find somebody with a track record in the area that you want to implement and have them push their research to the next thing while working with you. That's probably the strategic way to go about it. There are some opportunities that are more implementation oriented, but those are becoming more sort of less frequent. RED sort of has that. So if you had an engineering department you wanted to transform and you brought in an outside, and it's too late now because the letter of intent deadline was yesterday, but if you had your department and you said, but maybe next year's, but we don't know if there's going to be one next year. Because, but if you had your department and you said, I'm going to bring in this engineering education researcher from outside that does this really cool work we want to implement, and we're going to transform our department this way, then you could be, that's one opportunity where you could build it to be like that. So it takes some creativity and some work, but I think you want to sort of have partners and figure out how to do that. Because I think it can be done, but it probably has to be attached to some other strategic pieces.
Okay, so we've already stolen some time from Daryl Pines, our next moderator here, but let's thank our panel again.